So it looks like we're recording. And I'll start admitting people in. I got a cat in my face. Out here. Come on. Admit all.
Excellent.
All right. Got folks coming in. Good stuff. We'll wait just a few more minutes. I got a few more folks popping in here. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you. And I was just on a Teams meeting, so my use of these Zoom controls is going to be a little shaky at first here. All right, that might be just about everyone. Okay. I might be able to do that. Okay. So I'll keep an eye on that, and we'll let folks in as they continue to join or pop back out. Just to let you all know, we are recording this. So just a heads up there with that. But that will be accessible to you all if you all have to jump out, something going on, or this might be something you want to share with some of your staff members or something like that. That'll may be made accessible to you all on the Makuo website. So before I jump in and get started, Jocelyn, Amanda, is there any kind of introductory announcements we need to do, or just jump right in?
No, I think you're good to go. If anything, we'll just let people know the next webinar is going to be on July 6th, and that'll be a conversation with senior housing officers. So information about that will be coming out soon. So just to keep an eye on your email. And thank you, Johnny, for doing this. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Of course. All right, great. Well, with that being said, we will get started here. I have several things I want to cover, and this is going to be a good opportunity to reflect back on a few items, a few lessons learned here at West Virginia University with the planning of educational strategies, programs, those kind of things during COVID-19, as well as student staff training and how that occurred. So for those of you who don't know, just a quick introduction, Johnny Kocher, using he, him pronouns, West Virginia University. My job has changed a lot over the past year. However, during COVID, I was the staff member that was tasked with our residential curriculum, and then later on with our student staff RA training. So both of those items I was tasked with, and it coincided with COVID-19. So I don't know if there's anyone out there that can relate that had similar roles, but I was attempting to adapt our programming and our training to meet the safety requirements of this pandemic. So that's where this comes from. I always like to start with some photos. This is one of my family members here. And his name is Bilbo Baggins. We adopted him about a year ago. He was a feral cat someone just threw off on the side of the road, and we got from a shelter. And he's doing very well now, adapting into the rest of the family. So if you learn nothing else, you know what this creature looks like and about him. So you can ask me next time we meet in person how Bilbo's doing. All right, so let me first talk about educational strategies or programs. For this, I use that term a lot instead of programs because I feel like it articulates a little more of what we attempt to do, at least here at West Virginia University. So let me go through this first, and then we'll go into training, all right? So a little bit of background information. So this is what we try to do at WVU, and this is going to be pre-COVID. So we attempted to do programs related to our learning goals. So for those of you that are familiar with the curricular approach, we have 3 goals at WVU that our department centered on: intra and interpersonal development, and then life skills. So those 3 things, everything we do, we try to meet one of those goals with our various things. And how we do that: building floor programs, both passive and active, intentional interactions. Our staff are instructed to have conversations with the students on a regular basis, and then floor meetings. So that's kind of what the baseline was that we were doing prior to COVID. What that looked like was it was mapped out on a departmental map and community plan that looks similar to this. So I know this isn't a presentation on a curricular approach, but if anyone ever wants to talk more about that or get copies of some of these example documents I have, feel free to reach out. My contact will be on the last slide. But so we map out those strategies I just talked about, the floor meetings, the interactions, all those things. We map them out throughout the year. This goes throughout all the semesters, and we have various themes that are based on student development theory that influence that month. So in September, we know that folks have moved in, they're starting to interact more, they begin to have issues stemming from a lack of education on various items of consent, of alcohol use. Very big problem at a large institution when you get a lot of people together that are not used to that. So we focus a lot of attention on those during this because that's when our students need it based upon the reports we see. And then so on and so forth. We have various themes through the month, and all of our strategies are built around those. So that's what we were doing, and that's what we do. And the way we train our staff on that is, and this will come into play as we talk about how we adapted these to COVID-19, we really hit home on staff, hall directors, anyone. We don't just plan programs. That's not what we do. So what do you want to accomplish with your community? Is your floor, is your building having issues with this? Is you as a staff member, is your priority this? What are you trying to accomplish? Then you figure out what strategy you want to use. So curriculum 101, if no one's deep dive that before, that's what it's all about. What do you want to accomplish first, followed by what strategy you want to use? Not, I want to do this strategy and then I'm going to just cram it into my community somehow, without understanding how that would work. I used to be a high school teacher before this, and that was a big thing in teaching was your community, your classroom has various learning styles. Not everyone's going to respond the same way to the pizza party social, the floor meeting, whatever it may be. So you shouldn't rely on just that and making that strategy work. So that was a quick introduction of us at WVU and what we try to accomplish on the programming side of things. So as I mentioned, in my role as the coordinator of this curricular approach, COVID-19 hit, and we, like almost everyone else, were like, okay, now what? We can't do anything at all. Absolutely nothing. Our dean of students tasked us with, that not being an acceptable answer, so try again. So us, like many of you, I believe, were trying to determine, okay, COVID-19, we had our students leave. They eventually came back. Safety precautions in place. We can't do any of this stuff we did before. We can't do any of these things in person just because of the safety requirements put on us by our state. Our dean of students is saying you still need to do things. So what could we do? Now, you all probably followed along as the profession evolved with all this, and you started to see the virtual things creep in to varying degrees of success. I'm sure a lot of you on your campuses could point to some things that you all did or didn't do, that worked or didn't work. So what we did was we just said everything virtual. So everything we do, all these things that I keep going back to, virtual. So virtual programs, virtual floor meetings, virtual one-on-one conversations with residents, everything goes to Zoom. Teams didn't exist back then, or we're still scared of Teams, so we were using Zoom back then with everything. So you can all imagine how that worked. So as I just mentioned, from the teaching mindset, okay, everything we do must now be virtual, and there you go. So as you can imagine, and again, that many of you can probably relate to, we didn't have a lot of attendance at some of these things. So I don't know if any of you all attempted to do virtual floor meetings or virtual meetings with residents in a community, and had tremendous success. I don't know if anyone out there can relate to that, but we did not. So we did not. Our virtual interactions, which were the baseline of our curricular approach, those, despite the best efforts of our student staff, those did not happen. What we tried to do was, all right, RAs, reach out to your students and get them on a Zoom with you and ask them how they're doing. So you can imagine how that went. So it didn't go well. Our RAs did office hours on their floors. Now, again, okay, RAs, make up a Zoom, share that Zoom out with your students and talk to them about how they're doing. You can imagine how that went. Before some of the Zoom security things went into place, it went horribly bad in terms of all of the inappropriate stuff that students would come on there with. So very bad idea in retrospect. Now, a couple other things that were utter failures. We attempted to do virtual movies. I don't know if anyone, I still don't quite understand how those work, but the virtual thing where you can get people on there and watch something together. So that didn't work. It wasn't popular. And also I learned was also busting every copyright rule that exists. So that didn't go well. The Jackbox thing that a lot of people were into, I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but some kind of virtual game type thing, didn't go well either. Just didn't have a lot of success with, because what we were doing was just saying, okay, these virtual things on the weekend are there. Students come to them. They did not do that. There's virtual escape rooms too, and virtual magicians and all kinds of nonsense that we tried to do that didn't work well, because looking back on it now, as I have in red here, we were trying to take some things that maybe weren't even going to be popular with students, even in an in-person setting, and force them into a virtual setting where they were destined to be even less popular. So I'm gonna go out on the curricular lens again and say, an important mindset to have with a curricular approach is that certain things we do, we should not do just for the sake of doing. So what did we do? We were under pressure from the dean of students. We were all under pressure to try and create some connection, some sense of belonging among our students that were prohibited from meeting in any capacity, that we kind of forgot to think a little more critically about what we were doing. And we were just saying, okay, what's out there? Let's just Google virtual whatever and just book everyone. Now those virtual magicians made a killing off us, because we brought them in for a lot of things, but again, they were not meeting the needs of our students and what was there. So a lot about what didn't work and what we learned from that. Got someone coming in here, sorry. But it wasn't all a throwaway, and that's the purpose of this presentation, is we learned some things and we had some successes that we are going to think critically about incorporating into this next year, even though at this point we're back to business as usual in person. And one of those things was all these virtual Zoom strategies eliminated travel time with some of our different events we did. making it much more accessible. And where we saw this to the greatest degree of success was in our student leadership groups. So we had a campus RHA and campus community councils in each residence hall, and these student leaders would meet weekly and discuss things, and they had some funding to do programs and events with. This was always in person, and attendance was always fairly low. But we at WVU, if you've ever visited this campus, it's broken up into 3 separate campuses separated by a couple miles, and it's all on a hillside. We just never had a huge turnout for folks on an evening to come to a certain location on campus, just because travel reasons, difficulty using buses, things like that. However, what we found, which is kind of fairly obvious now that we think about it, is when we applied that virtual strategy to those student leadership meetings, we had a greater degree of turnout. We had people from different residence halls that normally weren't there contributing to these meetings. Now, I'll give Kocher some credit as well, which is the national and our regional Kocher affiliates, a shout out, because they were one of the first ones to go to this virtual strategy. And I think that contributed to our success with it, that they were using this Zoom platform for their meetings anyways. And our representatives on our campus kind of just fell in line with that. However, I really do believe that it solved an accessibility issue for us. And moving forward to the next year, even if attendance is not great, I think we are going to continue to use for our leadership meetings with our student groups, at least some Zoom meeting, format of some kind, to make sure that everyone that is able to be there is able to be there. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is going to remain popular, and I'm not saying this is applicable to every one of your institutions out there, but from a curricular approach, it's not about packing that room. It was great that we had a large attendance, but it's about offering that strategy out there. And we were critical on ourselves that by offering the strategy in person, we were making it dependent on a student's ability to travel. Did they have a vehicle? Were they able to use a bus? Were they able to do whatever? Were they comfortable walking at night to a meeting? Did they have classes or whatever? But by offering it up virtually, we've made it that much more inclusive for folks to be able to jump into our student government that we try to promote as a way for students to get involved. So definitely a plus that we're going to try to keep. And it's interesting, you see how the virtual strategy did not work to the more traditional programs, but from the student leadership group aspect, we had some success with it. Now, this is not a conference planning presentation either, but that's another thing I could talk at length on. But if anyone is interested in how our RHA ran those meetings virtually, or what voting and proposals and discussion looked like on those, I'd be happy again to reach out and talk through that. It might be another, I don't know if there's any more, maybe we can do another one on that. It's a good topic. I'll make a note on that. So what else worked? Passive strategy. So this is big with me, and it has been since we implemented our curricular approach. So let me take a few minutes to talk through this a little bit and what this is applied to, because COVID really forced our student staff who were maybe on the fence about how this would actually work and making it work. So passive strategies are different things that you do that don't involve packing a room with people to give a lecture, which is, a traditional program. We'll have a guest speaker, we'll get food, everyone get in this room, and we'll go over the stuff. And then when 2 people show up, we just, well, shucks, on to the next thing. That's our experience, at least in the past. So what we do is we empower our staff to think outside the box of ways they can meet their educational goals. So going back to this training slide, what do you want to accomplish? So the example I always use when we're looking at passive strategies is, a big thing for us, we want to educate on mental health resources on campus. Traditional approach, we bring in folks from our counseling office, give a presentation, give out some prizes, give out some food, and there we go. However, what we tried to do as we moved to this curricular model was okay, is that the best strategy? So in a community, we have a few apartment communities in our residence hall, family here on campus. Now, with a suite style apartment style residence hall, for anyone that has not worked in one of those, it is typically generally much more difficult to get them out of their bedrooms that are inside their apartments that go by their kitchen and living room and all that to attend one of these events. So if that community was attempting to educate on alcohol resources, or in my previous example, mental health resources, it's probably not the best idea to fit in that paradigm of, okay, everyone, Wednesday night at 7, mental health resource program, come learn from our counselors, you can win whatever. And again, I tend to ramble in these things, but if anyone's had any difficulty with some of these programs, I mean, we would offer like gift cards and all kinds of things, and we still wouldn't get people to show up. But even when we did, what were they there for? The prizes or the food, or if that, anything. So getting back to what the goal was, educational mental health resources, we had a community where they decided that, okay, suite style building, everyone has a refrigerator. We are going to print magnets with different items on them, mental health phone numbers, mental health warning signs. As a friend with a concern about a friend with mental health issues, how should you approach that? What should you ask? And they printed these magnets and they stuck them on every door in the entire community. Now, when you compare those things as that strategy versus bringing everyone together to a room to lecture on the same educational item, you can see that there's probably going to be a little bit of a difference there. And I'm not saying that everyone read that magnet on their refrigerator and said, oh, you know what? Now I get it. No. But if you were to say how many people glanced at that, or how many people in a moment of crisis were able to know that was there and reference it, as opposed to that one program you did that maybe it was successful and you had the full capacity of whatever room it was there, or the more likely scenario where you only had a few people there, what was of more educational benefit, which is the basis of the curricular approach. So what COVID did was it allowed us, sorry, I'm losing my voice as I go here. What COVID allowed us to do was to take these priorities we had and take the ideas our student staff had and force them to use passive strategies. So before it was kind of like, well, I don't kind of get it. I still don't kind of get it. We have to do programs. That's all we know. This is the only way we know how to do it, and force them to think outside the box. So that was one of many examples of how they applied that. So a couple other ones that I really liked. Virtual craft things. Has anyone heard of these or done those on campus before? So community bonding was the educational goal there. So typically prior to COVID, community bonding means you need to do a social of some kind. You need to get everyone out on the floor, or go outside and do something and get folks to interact with one another and get to know one another. So what they had to do was, okay, you can't do that. You can't get everyone out of their rooms in the floor lounge. Not possible. COVID safety. So what are you going to do for community bonding? Well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to pass out to everyone a door decoration supply thing. They're going to create a door decoration and they're going to share on that a few things that are important to them. A few things they're willing to share about their identity if they're comfortable doing so. A few things that they consider hobbies, a few things they like to do, their major, things like that. And they're going to stick it up on their door. And then, folks, as they go to their room, to and from whatever, they can look at those things. And what that does is that, let's say, I am walking, downstairs and walking back to my room. And as I'm walking, I see this person down the hall is interested in cats. This person down the hall is interested in Magic the Gathering. I see this person is interested in Lord of the Rings. And this person is an education history major. So what you've accomplished is a way to still create community bonding through a passive strategy that doesn't rely on everyone coming to a room. So I'm not saying that everyone on the floor did that. I'm not saying that everyone on the floor, developed those kind of connections, but it is a much better use of our staff's time, in our opinion, than it is to say, everyone force all your people, not force, we don't force them here, but everyone attempt to the best of your ability to get as many people from your floor into the lounge as possible. Our staff didn't like that stuff, prior to issues with attendance, all that. Compare the two educational outcomes. Did we meet our educational goal? Probably more so on the line of the passive strategy there. Okay. So as you all reflect on that deep thought, I'm going to mute myself. All right. So done reflecting. So the last thing I'll go over, and then I'll move on to the training stuff a little bit, was accessibility. I can't stress enough. I know I used it in the previous example about the student leadership groups, but probably the other area that I want to point to that we are going to continue to use is for our student staff selection process. And it's a similar trend. Prior to COVID, we simply did, everyone to continue in our RA selection process, you must attend an info session. Must. You have to. They are located here, here, and here. So we find a way to get there to them. And, looking back now that we've been forced to utilize these virtual platforms so extensively, it kind of makes more sense that when we're thinking about, if we're really trying to make this a inclusive and accessible experience for students, the ability to call in on a Zoom, the ability to participate in that process without having to travel is one that we really liked, because our numbers were up in terms of the numbers of folks that wanted to be a part of the process. And again, I don't have the data to back it up, although I am taking a qualitative assessment class this summer. So maybe if I give this again next year, I'll have that data to show you in a fancy chart. But it's because we made it more accessible and folks were able to do that. So kind of summing up, what worked and what we're going to continue using. The leadership groups was a big thing. Part of their strategy for this next year is going to be to continue to do some virtual meetings to allow folks from across our campus to participate in student government. The passive strategies that our staff were able to understand to a greater degree because they were forced to, and kind of see a little bit more about how it's not all about getting people packed in a room and giving them pizza and calling it a day. That's a program complete. It's about the educational goal and using what COVID forced us to think about to apply this thinking outside the box of, how can I apply passive strategies to meet the goals I want to meet with my community, mental health education, community bonding, and the list goes on. How can I do things that meet those goals that doesn't necessarily involve getting everyone in a room? Definitely something we want to continue because it falls right in line with the curricular approach and what that's about. And then the staff selection and making really all of our processes more inclusive and ability for students to participate in. All right. So those are some of the major lessons learned. I had considered in this presentation solely focusing on that, but I thought it was also important to look at training a little bit, because this was an area, as I mentioned, that I was tasked with and I learned a lot from. So I wanted to share this additional topic as well and spend the last half of this presentation going through that. So I don't know if I have any other folks that have been voluntold that they are running staff training, RA trainings, things like that on the call. I'm sure there are some out there that have had that privilege to do so. So what we did. So here is I always kept this. I always kept this because this was my nice training schedule ready to go. my first year assigned this task. I was all, excited. We're going to make this more efficient and more meaningful and all this. We got rotating sessions. We got all the rooms booked and we're good to go. And then, all right, COVID happened and everything is canceled. All of this work, all of that coordination, all of that planning, trashed. You cannot do anything in person, but you still must train your staff. So what a directive that was. And again, I don't know if anyone on the call was in that same boat of, okay, you can't do anything in person, but you still need to train your people. That was definitely myself. So how would we do that? How would we do that? That was the question that I spent a lot of time thinking on. And I'll go back to the my previous life as a teacher. I had to apply a lot of those items to this challenge we had of how can we meet different learning styles through this virtual mandate that we have. And I should say it wasn't even a virtual mandate. We had no clue what to do. We had never done a presentation on Zoom. And honestly, it was because of my participation in some of these Makuo webinars that I had a little bit of a reference of how it could be done. And then, as I mentioned, our friends at Kocher and NACUR, the regional and national student leadership groups, they had done some meetings virtually. So I had saw that. So I knew it was possible. However, I knew that we could not just do 100 Zoom meetings and just take everything that was on this schedule and just say, all right, staff, you welcome back to campus. We now have 2 weeks of live Zooms for you to set through. I at least had to know that probably wouldn't be the best way to go about. So what we had to do, and what I think we should have done a long time ago, was look at our training schedule, this mess that I just showed you, and say what is absolutely critical. Is anyone on the call? And I don't know why I put my hand up. You don't have to raise your hand. Is anyone on the call, in one of those scenarios where you've attempted to create an RA training that's included some type of DEI training, some type of, mental health training, and you've had your campus partners or you yourself have said, okay, we have an hour session to train on this. And that's all we care about this topic. 1 hour of training and then boom, student staff, you're good to go. I see a thumbs up and a couple heads on it. That's always been something we've thought about and been like, well, that sucks, moving on to the next problem we have to worry about. So what we did was we thought about what must we train on now? So we can't get around time constraints, but is there a way to condense our training schedule by saying this is what we must train on now, and then we'll have touch points throughout the rest of the semester in which we build upon that initial training. And it goes to this mindset, and some of you might have already, we might just be behind the curve here at WVU. Some of you might already do this, but do we train on something and then call it quits, or do we train our people throughout the entire year? And that's kind of what we went to, was what is critical to train on now? And this is what we came up with. So as you can see, very much condensed. You have almost half the number of sessions, but the idea was that, okay, we're going to have our most critical sessions now. And if anyone wants copies of these things, I can send them to you. You just email me after this. But so we'll have our training now, and yes, it will be a brief session, but next month, guess what? As you saw, our priority, and we know as a problem among our students, is alcohol education, consent education. So even though our staff are getting equity assurance training, they're also next month, they're going to get a continuing ed session on this. And that took a little bit of the pressure off us trying to cram everything in to this training schedule. So that was a little bit of a win for us. And it's something we're going to continue to do, is to not pressure ourselves that we must train 100% on everything at the beginning. Let's get what needs to be trained on now done, and then we can worry about building upon some of those skills later on and incorporate those into a continuing education session. All right. So now I'm gonna share with you a lot more resources here as we start to wrap this up that you can all ask for me at the end of this. So we knew what was the most critical. Now, how are we going to go about training these most critical topics? I'm just assuming you're seeing my screen change when I'm clicking. I hope everyone is. I see Deanne nodding, so that's good. So how do we go about these? We've decided these are our critical topics that we must train on at the beginning. Our staff must have before our students come back. The rest we're going to worry about later on in continuing ed sessions. So how do we deliver these? So again, at COVID, when that first was impacting us, we could not do anything in person. So what we decided to do was to have a combination of live Zooms and recorded sessions. And I think this was probably our biggest win, was thinking outside the box to know that thinking about our student staff and how they learn best, and how we all have learned to learn best through this Zoom world we now live in, or whatever, virtual world of little faces on the screen here. Not everyone was going to do well on a live Zoom. People were going to check out and whatever. It's just natural, right? We're all multitaskers. We put this stuff on and we're working on something else. And that's the way it is. So some of these we decided to record, so that way it could be presented to the students, whenever they needed to, and they could be debriefed about it later. So the way this is color coded here is the blue was a recorded session. And the other color here, I don't know what you call that, yellow. It's blue and yellow. That's our school colors. That's why I use that. The yellow is a live Zoom that was led by a hall director. So we decided, okay, we're going to do these recorded. We're going to do these live. The recorded were mainly campus partners. Like we have our counselors, we have our university police, we have our folks at DEI, Equity Assurance, we have our curriculum. Like those are campus partners we would normally bring in. So campus partners, you can't come in. There's just no way around it. And we don't think that having 200 people on a Zoom is going to be the best for people to ask questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to get you on a meeting just like we are on now, being recorded. And I brought the campus partner on. They brought their presentation up. They went through it. I asked some questions from the perspective of some student staff, and that was it, recorded. And from there, the other items were led by the hall directors. So these recordings were already done throughout the summer. We worked through and knocked those out. These other items, we had our hall coordinators manage. But what we did was we didn't simply say, just jump on here and do this presentation. We created a bunch of these. And when I say a bunch, take a look at all those things that are fairly extensive and time intensive to create. But we had these for every one of our training topics. And it has some red text on here, and that is where a hall director knows that they need to incorporate some things about their own community. However, the rest of it is the departmental standard. The departmental philosophy does not change on how someone is to run their community council, their in-hall government. That does not change. How they go about doing that can change, but not how they do it. And I will say that, I don't know if anyone on here has had any trainings in the past or onboardings or things that have been somewhat lacking in your opinion, where everyone feels like they've always been trained thoroughly and properly and efficiently and all that. However, this forced us to get a little more organized with our training, because before, with all of these in-hall topics, we kind of just said hall directors train on these topics and figure it out. But what COVID required us to do was to get a little more attention to detail. And by creating all of these things, all of these presentations that the hall directors used and presented to their staffs on a Zoom, and then from there added in their own community specific items, I think it allowed us to tighten up and kind of be a little more clear on what the department was asking of folks. And that way, not only does it provide our hall coordinators a little bit less that they have to worry about, they don't have to create their own presentations. They can worry about communicating this to their staff and following up on it and all the community specific things, not on the actual big picture items that don't change. So this was a big plus, and we're going through revisions of these for next year. They're going to be utilized in the same way and given to the hall directors. So a big plus for us. So we had the videos, we had the template presentations that the hall coordinators went through. I had the videos up here so you can kind of see. I don't know what will happen if I click on it. It might crash this whole thing, but we'll see. So this is our folks at the Carew Center. So you can see it's just simply a presentation from our counselors, and they went through all of the things, and then the staff had access to this video. The biggest takeaway we had from this was kind of something that wasn't considered at the very beginning. By creating our bank of videos and creating our templated presentations, we created a solution to one of our biggest headaches with this training schedule, which was always our staff absences, our mid-year hires, or whatever. So, you know, again, if anyone can relate to having a lot of staff turnover mid-year, if they can relate to, you know, someone, you know, weddings and, you know, everything like that, you know, it seems like every RA we have has a wedding they have to go to every August. It helps with that, okay? Because we're able to have these resources available to us, and they're onboarded. We provide them with these things and they go through it, and then it helps solve that a little bit. Oh, we got it. What's in the chat? Oh, so true. Thanks, Daniel. And you all, if you have questions, or I should have said this at the beginning, feel free to unmute yourself and all that. So that was a big learning curve for us with that. Now, the last training item that we had to find a solution to was our conduct training behind closed doors. It's sometimes called, you know, walking through how staff have to interact with a student who's breaking our policy. Now, we toyed around with the idea of doing Zoom sessions where we had people acting out the scenarios. You know, you can find some of those on YouTube already from some schools, but that with our time, that was just not possible. That was just not possible to do all the recordings and all that. But we still had to train our staff on how to address these issues. So what we came up with was maybe just writing it out. And that's what we ended up doing. Was we created a document for all of our policy violations. And I know it sounds like a lot, and I just mentioned how we didn't have a lot of time, but this was a lot less time than trying to record it. So what we did was we created info sheets for every policy violation we had. We listed what the policy violation was, the scenario, the most common times this situation would be encountered, the most common issues we see with staff not addressing the issue properly, a sample narrative of two staff dealing with the situation, and then important notes at the very end that a staff member should point out in the report that needs to be certain that they include when they're documenting a situation that they encounter. So as I mentioned, we did one of these for all of those items. And then during our in-hall training that was virtual but live, led by the hall director, they walked through the most common. They didn't walk through all of them, but they walked through this scenario with their staff and they went through it. Now, I will say that this was probably not the most useful in the sense of, I mean, who wants to sit and listen through 20 Word documents being read to them or talked about? No one wants to sit through and listen to that. However, what we succeeded in doing was much like our presentations that I just showed you, that we now have a fairly strong library of. We have these scenarios that we can task our staff with reviewing and reading and having access to complement their training that we are going to now in person, where they'll do maybe the more traditional of acting out the scenario in front of everyone and pointing out issues and going the more traditional behind closed doors route, but also having these files right here that they can go back to and reference. And again, back to the other point, when we have new staff onboarded, when we have new staff come in, and this is for professional staff too, we don't have the time to create a whole nother theatrical production of going through all these scenarios. So we have these documents we can share with them for that. So that was a product that we succeeded with there. And I'll just show you. So this is all. So when I said we had a lot, we had a lot. So that's all of our conduct scenarios that we have. So it's a good bit of information, but it's a good library of items to have. So how did we present all of this stuff? How did we present all of this training? We used our eCampus platform, which is our online class platform here at the institution. So I want to throw this out here, and I thought it was important because I had no clue about this, and I don't think it was something that I had ever thought about, but there are the ability for staff from other departments to use certain pieces of software that maybe were meant only for academic affairs. So our Blackboard eCampus software, where all of our online classes live, was where we decided to do this. And I actually was pointed in this direction by one of my professors who said, anyone can go out and request one of these shells on eCampus. So I worked through our tech office and they were able to get me hooked up with this. And instead of just simply all this living on a Google Drive, we were able to prevent it in a fairly nice format here. So let me see if it'll crash our system. Those are all the classes I'm taking, by the way. There's that. Where's the one? Here's that qualitative class I'm taking. So focus, Johnny. No one wants to hear that. So here's our platform. So this took a little bit of learning, but I was able to put this together so anyone can do it. So after I was able to work with our tech department to get a shell built on the software that is typically used to host our online classes here at the university, we were able to take our sequenced training and just host it there live. So we added all of the RAs onto it, which was a simple process that, again, the tech department took care of. Here's a spreadsheet of all of our student staff, add them to this class, and then anyone can access this. And so as you work through your training, hall directors, they knew that on the first day, their staff had these sessions, and all they're pointing their staff to is the page. Because as you click down through the modules, all those videos are there that we saw in those folders, and they can watch them there. And the cool thing with this was we were also able to put in some assessments. So we had quizzes after each one, which was another byproduct, I think, of the COVID-19 switch to virtual. Was the assessment after our training sessions was always something we wanted to do, but just never had the time to put in. But when we were using this virtual software, we were able to do it fairly well and had these for all the training sessions where after a student were to watch the video, they could start this quiz, and we were able to get a good assessment of their learning from that. So that's that. That is all of the items there. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot from this training. Conversion from virtual or from in-person to virtual. A lot of the items are things that we are going to continue to use. We're actually in the process now of creating our staff training for this next semester. And some of the things we are going to continue to use is we're going to continue to use some of our virtual recorded video sessions with some of our campus partners. So our counselors at our center on campus, it's just not possible with their schedules the way they are now to travel and do 4 different sessions with our staff and rotate through. So we're going to do that virtually. Now, the one thing we are going to attempt to do is to do some of the campus partner presentations, like with our counselors, like with our DEI staff. We're going to try to do it live and broken up by campus. So keeping the groups fairly small, but doing it live and seeing what kind of response we get from our student staff. Because we will say there is no replication for being able to ask questions, but there's also some thought that potentially in a small group virtual setting, you might be more inclined to ask questions than you would be in person. And that's just a thought. That's just an assumption that we're going to test out and see how it goes. It might be that no one asks any questions and it's really of no benefit to do it live. It would be just as good and more easier on everyone's time to do it recorded. And if that's the case, we'll go back to that, but we're curious to see how it would go there. And the biggest thing I pushed on my director, who was initially, Johnny, back to in person. We need to get this COVID stuff behind us, scrap all of that virtual stuff, back to business as usual virtual. And I challenged and said, are we really meeting our educational goals to get all 50, 70, 200, whatever your staff are, all those people in a room and lecture them? Are they actually learning from that? What are they getting out of that? Are they actually getting the material they need? My answer is no, because I see everyone on their cell phones when they're in those sessions and all that. And, very few people ask questions. So my challenge was no, it's not. So we should still try to do some of this stuff virtually. We can't ask our campus partners who have been stretched thin and continue to be during this pandemic to travel all over the world and do 100 presentations in a row. Let's keep it virtual. That way they don't have to travel and they can go from that to that. And then, as I mentioned, the late hires and all those things, even the sessions we are doing in person now, we are directing our staff to still, in some cases, make sure we have a recording of each one. That way we still have that library of documents that our late hires can be onboarded with when no one has time to go through this training all over again. So that's what we're trying to do. Another kind of final item that we're going to give a try and see how it goes is, instead of everyone being in their individual residence hall rooms on the Zoom, being led by the hall director in their office on the Zoom, we're going to give a try to have the hall director in their lounge or community room space or whatever space they use for training to actually bring the Zoom live up in that room. And that way everyone in the room is seeing it together. The hall director there is there just to make sure everyone's following along and to maybe see if that will also be a good check on learning to make sure everyone, is getting what they need to do, because we can conclude a session on student conduct or something like that. Press play on the video. Everyone in the room watches the video or watches the Zoom meeting over. Then the hall director can talk about building specific or community specific items for that community themselves and not have to do that in a room of 200 people where no one wants to hear how Summit Hall deals with that because I live in Oakland Hall. So that's another thing we're going to give a try. All right, I am just about out of time here. And I know I went through a whole lot of information trying to pause on the items that I thought were the biggest successes, the biggest, failures we had, and also incorporate a little bit of how we're attempting to move and use some of the lessons learned into this next fall. Because, folks, if I can speak anything from truth, it's been my time working with the residential curriculum that a lot of the strategies prior to COVID were not working anyways. And I know there's a lot of you on the call that would nod your head in agreement with this. This is not about COVID canceled things that we were doing and they were all working successfully, perfectly. That's not the case. At least on our campus, a lot of the programs we did had low attendance. The staff were frustrated because they were being forced to do them. The students were not getting anything out of it. And we were just not using our time efficiently, if that makes any sense. And what COVID allowed us to do was to get a crash course in using these virtual platforms to meet our educational goals. And now that we're able to take those back and blend what we were doing prior to with the lessons learned from the virtual environment and meld those together into the most beneficial educational whatever, plan for this upcoming fall is what we have to do. It would really be a disservice to say that all of this has just been a temporary fix until we could get back to business as normal. So I hope you all got a few things from this. I appreciate it. I'm going to hang out for a little while. We have 5 minutes left, so I'll take questions from anyone that wants to. Did I allow you to unmute yourself? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. That's another, right? The muting, unmuting, and all that. A big lesson learned. You always want to have that enabled. I didn't hear. I probably should have. So if anyone has any questions or anything in the chat, I'd be happy to talk more about any specific issue. I'm always welcome to share documents with you or talk more. My email's there. Feel free. So I will hang out for a while if you have any questions. Otherwise, appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
And hi, others. It's good to see you.
Hi, David.
Hey, hey.
Have a good Monday.
You too.
I should have mentioned, there was actually, well, I'm still recording. So everyone, you just left. But one thing I forgot to mention was, there was some resistance to doing some of this stuff virtually still, a good bit actually. And I know I mentioned I had to really say, okay, but what are we trying to accomplish? How do we make sure these are as educational as possible? And is the in-person venue the best for what we're trying to accomplish? It took a lot of that to actually get some buy-in to, okay, you can still do a few things this way, because there really was, you had COVID and you had everything must be virtual, no conversation. Now it's like everything must be in person, no conversation. If we do things virtual, it means we're not, whatever. So not everyone's on board for that stuff.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense though, like you said, for like accessibility reasons and also the labor of the professionals,
Yeah,
especially if you're able to keep things relevant to like not just that academic year, and you can reuse it and recycle it. Like it saves so much time and energy, and the students probably appreciate it too, just having the option of like, oh, I can watch this on my own time and then have 5 days or